Hello, welcome to Cellular Respiration lecture video number 6. Today's video is going to focus primarily on electron transport chain and chemiosmosis. You should see a lot of similarities that you already saw back in our chapter on photosynthesis regarding ATP synthase, regarding electron transport chain, regarding pumps, pumping H pluses. You're going to see chemiosmosis again. The only thing you're going to notice that's different, things may be flipped upside down or vertically or horizontal. Things are just going to be in a different location than they were in, for example, inside the chloroplast, because this isn't a chloroplast. This is a mitochondria. So things are going to be flip-flopped, but they generally work the same way. Okay, this process is called oxidative phosphorylation. So chemiosmosis, in this case, is called oxidative phosphorylation. Why? It would not take place if oxygen was not present. And so phosphates would not be attached to ADPs. That's phosphorylation if oxygen was not present. Okay, so this is specifically oxidative phosphorylation and chemiosmosis combined. All right, so let's go through it. First off, let's go back to our big picture. So here's the big picture again. And what do we have in the big picture? Well, glycolysis took place. Pyruvic acid was modified and turned into acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA entered the citric acid cycle and got oxidized a whole bunch, making a lot of these NADHs and FADH2s. So now there's a lot of NADHs and FADH2s that were produced inside of that matrix, that mitochondrial matrix. And now these guys are going to be used. They're going to be going down a whole bunch of reactions called the electron transport chain. They're going to eventually be making a lot of ATP. As they get used, these NADHs and FADH2s, they get oxidized and converted back into NADs and FADs so that these processes can happen again and continue this process. Water is made at the very end. Oxygen enters the cycle at the very end. So without oxygen, this whole thing will stop. Oxygen allows this very last step along with these steps of oxidation to take place. So oxygen basically at the very end picks up electrons and gets reduced, forming H2O. All right. So NADHs and FADH2s, they get oxidized. Oxygen gets reduced. That's the connecting reactions. All right. So let's go through the detail. So where is this all taking place? So let's do a quick review. Outside of the mitochondria, you have glycolysis. And if you remember, glycolysis produced a chemical called pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid then entered the mitochondria through those special transport proteins. And as it enters, it got converted into acetyl-CoA. So now acetyl-CoA is inside of here. All right. Well, what happens next after acetyl-CoA is formed? Well, the citric acid cycle takes place right there. So that's happening in this blue area. You have the citric acid cycle taking place. Acetyl-CoA is broken down, and the citric acid cycle produces a lot of NADHs and FADH2s. So they're in this blue area here. So that's where the NADHs and FADH2s are. Now they're going to be going and participating in an electron transport chain. And where's that chain? Well, it's in this outer membrane. So that's where those proteins of the electron transport chain are located. Okay, so this is where things are happening. Electron transport chain happens in this protein I'm showing you here. All right, without oxygen, electron transport chain doesn't work. And ATP synthesis, you can't make ATP this way. Okay, so let's go through the picture to see all the details. Oh, and by the way, before I forget, prokaryotes, they have an electron transport chain. They have an enzyme ATP synthase, but theirs is in their plasma membrane. They do not have a mitochondria. Okay, so we do it in our mitochondria. Prokaryotes and bacteria do it in the plasma membrane because they need a membrane, and that's the only available membrane that they have. Okay, so here we go. Let's begin. So the NADHs and FADH2s drop off these high energized electrons that they have picked up. They drop them off in what's called the electron transport chain. It's a series of reactions, and a series of proteins are passing along these electrons. Okay. During this electron transport chain where the NADHs and the FADH2s, and by the way, they lose their hydrogen, so they get oxidized and they get oxidized. During this process of electron transport chain, it produces a lot of energy. This energy goes into pumping. See these pumps? Pumping H pluses out of the matrix. Okay, out of the matrix. All right, where does it pump them to? To what's called the intermembrane space, the space between the two membranes. Okay, so the electron transport chain. So it drops off their electrons. Okay, it drops off their electrons, and these H pluses break off. These H pluses break off, and these H pluses start building up. So what happens? The energy that is produced through this electron transport chain takes these H pluses and it pumps them out, out of the matrix. So there's a buildup of hydrogens on the outside of the matrix, in between the two membranes. Okay. At the very end of this electron transport chain, the electrons actually have to get picked up. They get picked up by oxygen along with some hydrogens, and water is made. Without this step here, the process would stop. Okay. So oxygen is the final electron acceptor of the electron transport chain. So it picks up the electrons and the hydrogens, making water. All right. So at the end of the electron transport chain, oxygen picks up the electrons, making water. Right? So now there's a buildup of hydrogens outside of the matrix. Well, these hydrogens, since there's so many of them out here, they naturally want to diffuse and enter back in again. Because there's so many of them here, they want to move from where there's a lot of them to where there's less of them. So they go through that protein called ATP synthase. So they diffuse back through ATP synthase. As they diffuse through, ADP attaches phosphates, producing ATP. All right. So this is very similar to what happened in plants, except things are flip-flopped. Okay. So the hydrogens are diffusing back into the matrix. As they do that, phosphorylation takes place, phosphate is attached, and ATP is made. This whole process is called oxidative phosphorylation. That's because oxygen was needed in order to really make this happen and phosphorylate and produce the ATP. Okay. Now, how efficient is cellular respiration? Well, the whole thing, if you compare them to, if you probably remember back in one of our earlier lectures, anaerobic respiration was only about 2% efficient. 2. Aerobic respiration is 39% or so efficient. So it's about 20 times more efficient. So this is why a larger mobile organism like you and me, made out of many cells, we need oxygen, because we need to break down our sugar aerobically to get as much as we can. And we are still not that crazy efficient. We're only about 39% efficiency on breaking it down. But that's much better than 2% efficiency that you get from anaerobic respiration. Okay, we'll stop there.